Hi there. Welcome to the Saloon. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd like to kindly ask you, before you take a sip of beer, to go up and hit that subscribe button. And not only that, hit your notification bell so anytime I release a Shiloh Saloon Stories, Out of Control Vintage, my other show, or the Friday Night Gamble, you'll be notified. Let me get a little drink here. It's a hot one out there, folks. Well, where we left off last time, I had gone out to Nebraska with a 18-year-old girl and gotten stuck in a frozen wasteland, or so I left it. Well, that's a little bit of what happened. I ended up moving out to Nebraska. I lived in Bellevue, Nebraska for about, I think it was 2 months. Long enough to go there and get a Sigma guitar and pick up one of those and add to the only guitars I had with me, which was my Yamaha, old 70s Yamaha guitar and a Hohner Dobro. And set out in Nebraska for about 2 months. And you know, it was great that I did stay in Nebraska for 2 months and didn't have anything to do, because there's nothing to do there. Whatever you're thinking about Nebraska, if you haven't been, it's probably true. It was a boring place. It was the middle of winter. I mean, every day was like 20 degrees, so you really couldn't do much, right? Except sit in the basement and go over your acoustic blues routine, which is what I did. I basically used that time. I moved away from Statesville because I wanted to reinvent myself. I felt like I couldn't find out who I really was as a musician hanging around my hometown that I grew up in. So I took those 2 or 3 months, 2.5 months, whatever it was, I sat and mainly played guitar, even more so just like I did out at the video store for 8 hours a day. That's all I did, was sit around and basically perfect an act, you know. And I'm not saying like a character or anything like that when I say an act, like a show, you know, where I could do 2 sets of really, really good acoustic blues. And at that time I was playing a lot of, you know, Blind Blake, Robert Johnson, Son House, Sleepy John Estes, I mean, you name it, Lighton Hopkins. That was my bag, was doing old acoustic blues. That stuff caught me at an early age, along with the you know, the urban kind of electrified blues of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, all those guys, Robert Nighthawk. But the acoustic stuff really spoke to me there for a while. And when I started off playing music, oddly enough, when I would play with other people, it really wasn't electric. It was either, you know, probably with an acoustic guitar with one of those, I think I had one of those Dean Markley sound hole things that went in it. So you'd plug into an amp, but we'd still be playing acoustic a lot of the times. When I would go out and play, though, you know, later on, I would just play acoustic in front of a Shure SM57 instrument microphone, because I felt like it had more of an acoustic guitar tone and captured more of what an acoustic guitar sounds like, and I still do today. So I went out to Nebraska. We stayed there for a couple months, and then we moved to Wichita, Kansas. And the first thing I found out in Wichita is there were places to play, and there were quite a few places to play. Not only that, I know this sounds really weird because you hear all the places that have blues scenes are like Louisiana, you know, St. Louis, New Orleans, I guess was what I meant by Louisiana, Memphis, Chicago, of course. But I know that Wichita does not sound like it might have a thriving blues scene, but it did. I mean, and you know, when I say blues scene, that it wasn't like they were playing the old deep blues. I mean, these folks were basically doing rocked up versions of, you know, Stormy Monday, Mustang Sally, you know, a lot of Stevie Ray Vaughan, but it was all, they were hip to the blues. They had a blues society, the whole thing. So the first thing I did was call the Blues Society and let them know I was in town and I was a blues musician, and they were kind of helpful and you know, telling me just a little bit of showing me the ropes, not much, you know. I mean, it was just kind of like, hey, I'm here, you know. The first thing I did is I figured out that a couple blocks down from the house where I was staying was a bar named Carey's. And this would have been the first place I played when I came to Wichita. They had an open mic on Sundays, and I thought the best way that I could arrive and show who I was to show up at this open mic. So I went down there with my acoustic guitar, played, I think I played an Elmore James tune, like Dust My Broom, and then I played Robert Johnson's Hot Tamales. And it just blew folks away. They had never, I don't know what happened, if Delta blues, that old school blues, 30s, 40s blues, had ever made it out that way. I tend to think maybe it didn't, because these folks had never heard anything like it, and they lost their minds. And, you know, what I tried to do in leaving a place where everybody knew who I was and going to another place where no one knew who I was, it was almost, in my mind, like when Robert Johnson left and he came back a musician and blew everybody away, because that's, even though I didn't leave Wichita, Kansas, I was able to go to a new town, and just by chance, a town where they didn't, you know, had not been exposed to this kind of blues. And so immediately I was like the talk of the town and amongst the music scene. And I remember the owner of the bar got mad at me for a while and would go around and say, well, that's the only 2 songs he knows. He doesn't know any other songs besides that, you know. So it was bizarre. So as you know, I met my friend Cliff Major. We talked about him. Started playing music with his son Jesse Major as time went on. But you know, I'm just kind of going to zoom around here because you know we can't nitpick everything. But the next thing that happened was I started playing around town, and a lot. I mean, everyone knew my name. I was on the radio. The first thing I did, the first big break I had, was opening up for Dr. Hook. Remember him? Cover of the Rolling Stone. Well, I felt like I was in Rolling Stone, or on the cover of Rolling Stone, when I opened up for him, because I played at basically like a little coliseum called the Orpheum. No, excuse me, the Cotillion. I'm sorry, the Cotillion, which was in Wichita, Kansas. A guy named, I think his name was Richard Leslie, I want to say. I may have him confused with someone else, but I think that was who had the Cotillion. And he had seen me out somewhere around town and said, hey, I'd like to use you for an opening act for big names that come through here. I said, that's great, you know. So I ended up opening up for Dr. Hook. And I'll never forget, I was so nervous backstage. You know, I had my own dressing room. First time I ever had a dressing room in my life. And I thought, man, I had arrived. I'll never forget, I wore like a 3-piece suit when I went out there and did the show, and played acoustic guitar. And I don't know if I had a dobro, if I had my national in it or not. I can't even remember. But all I do remember is there was some seating, but at the front of the stage there was like a general admission section. And I'd go out there and start playing. I'm scared shitless, and the first thing I did was hit like an Elmore James song, Dust My Broom, something like that in that vein. And people just started coming up to the stage. I mean, it was nuts. I mean, I was so damn scared. I had never played in front of that many people in my life. I was shaking in my boots, basically. And I go out there and blow these folks away. They had a fantastic time. After I was done, hell, people were like, you know, Dr. Hook came on stage. I had like printed off some little CDs, you know. It was like a little demo kind of CD thing that you make, you know, and just basically is what I was giving clubs, but I was selling them at my gigs too. I mean, they were basically you know, I think it was like a 10-song CD that I had homemade myself. And I sold every single one of them that I had. People came up to Dr. Hook's on stage playing. And so I thought I had really, really, really arrived doing that. Kept playing around town quite a bit. Ended up opening for a lot of people. I ended up opening up for Buddy Guy. I opened up for Kenny Neal. I opened up for, geez, a lot of people. Little Ed and the Blues Imperials. What else? Just on and on and on. I even did this thing called Wheatland Jam, where I opened up for Paul Rogers and his new version of Bad Company. That's a funny tale. Maybe I'll tell in another Shiloh Saloon stories. But I played around town quite a bit, got a real name for myself, and you know, was not to toot my own horn, but I was like the talk of the town just because these folks had never seen anything like this. So around, I guess it was 2000, maybe 2001. I can't remember the year. But anyway, it was like the first year I lived out in Kansas. And I started going on the road a little bit and playing in like Oklahoma, all around there, you know, Kansas City. And somehow, I can't remember how it happened, but the Oklahoma City, no, excuse me, Tulsa, Oklahoma Blues Club got in touch with me. And they told me that they were going to have this blues competition, and the winner of it would go to Memphis to compete in the same competition I talked about last episode that my friend at the time, Abe Reed, who I was playing with when I was young, at the round right before I moved to Kansas, he had won that competition in Memphis. So I was familiar with it. And they said, hey, we like your music and really, really, really think that you should, you know, come down here and compete in the competition. And so I thought to myself, well, that sounds pretty good. So I go down there and meet the folks and everything, go to my hotel. Well, hell, I find out there's like, I can't remember, like 12 other bands competing in this competition. And I think 2 of them had horn sections. I know one of them did at least. I mean, we're talking 20-some years ago, so it's hard to remember. But I do remember one of them had horn sections. So I had my acoustic guitar. And I never forget, I was the second person to play. And yeah, you know, I'm gonna preface this a little bit by saying that when I was young, when I was a little kid, young kid in school, elementary school, junior high, high school, I never went out for sports. I never went out for anything. I was a pretty introverted kid. You know, I had a couple friends that I hung with most of the time. You know, but I found myself in my room, listening to records, and, you know, or making movies or doing my own things because my interests weren't the interest of my peers. You know, I was into other things and they didn't get it. They didn't understand when I'd take, you know, try to take even my friends, when I tried to take them over to see Max Drake, who, you know, that was my only exposure when I was 13 or 14 years old, is seeing live blues and a real serious guitar player. You know, and see that in front of me, watching it right there in person. I couldn't even get them to stay for a song, you know what I mean? And I had never won any awards or trophies or anything like that, you know. I don't think I won anything in my life up to that point. And so I'm the second person. And I'll never forget Jimmy Vaughn's keyboard player. I think his name is Bill Willis. He's passed away, but he was one of the judges at the competition. No pressure, right? So I remember that I was the second person to play. I played after the first band, and I go up there and I play like some Robert Johnson stuff, and I can't even remember, probably some more Elmore James, because I was an Elmore James fanatic back then. That's like, I played a lot of that stuff. I was huge, and I still am. I still love Elmore James, but I was highly, highly influenced by him around that time. Did a lot of his music. And so, you know, these other bands come up and start playing. And like I said, when the one with the horn section or the 2 with the horn section came up, you know, I thought, man, this has been a lot of fun. You know, they're never going to go for this shit, what I just did, acoustic by myself. And I just thought to myself, you know, I'll have a good time while I'm here. So what did I do? I just started drinking. And watched all the bands, stayed for the whole thing, of course, to see if you know, who the winner was going to be. And I'll never forget, they went up to the thing and said, and first place, you know, they did 3rd place, 2nd place, and 1st place, Matt Walsh. And man, it blew me away. I mean, it was really like, I'll never forget, my hearing went out. You know, have you ever had that happen where your hearing just gets muffled and you start hearing like, kind of like that tee kind of thing going on? It was like that. I mean, it was like everything just stood still. And everybody was looking at me and shit. I'll never forget, this sounds hokey as hell, and I'm not like a real emotional guy or sensitive, you know, one of those cats, but I'm not one to do this, but I literally started having tears welling up. I could feel them in my eyes. And I didn't want to go up there crying, you know, for God's sakes. And it was really hard not to, because I'd never won anything in my life. And they're sitting there with this big-ass trophy. And then now on top of that, no, I'm going to end up going to Memphis and going to do this thing. So I go up there, and I'll never forget, I hung out with Bill, Jimmy Vaughn's keyboard player. And I hope I'm getting his name right. I think that's what it was. If it's not, I'll put it in this this video. But I'll never forget afterwards coming up, and he told me, he said, man, he said, what you do, man, he said, it's fantastic. He said, you doing that old down home stuff like Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry. He said, you know, he said, I know you said you were from North Carolina. They said you were from North Carolina when they introduced you. You surely have to know who they are. And I said, well, yeah, you know. And he said, you know, they hated each other, right? And I said, no, I didn't. And he was the one that hit me to that. He told me, he said, you know, he said, well, you got it. He said, man, you got the blues thing down, that old school blues stuff. And he said, you keep it up, man. He said, you're gonna be something, man. He said, and I'll never forget that, man. He was such a nice guy at that moment. We only talked for about 20 minutes or so, but he was so kind to take the time and give me that little bit of encouragement. So the next thing I had to do was get to Memphis. And I remember, you know, I'm like 22 at this point or something like that, you know, and broke, young kid, young guy, and, you know, just trying to make it off these gigs, you know, and scraped a little money together to get an airplane ticket to and from, and I think I had like maybe, I don't know, $75 for the whole 4 days that I was there. And I already paid for my hotel room. I was staying at a Red Roof Inn. And I took a guitar with me in a suit, and because I wanted to look real sharp, you know, when I played my set. And, you know, went to Memphis and had a blast. Made the $75 stretch the whole time. I think I was supposed to play the night after I got there, I'm pretty sure. And, you know, when I was watching, they divided up into all these clubs, you know, and I go into the place where I'm playing, and, you know, the band that was playing before me, they're all dressed up like, you know, I don't know, these like red suits, and it's just over the top. It was really classless looking, you know, and it looked like blues cartoon characters. And they were just playing basically rock and roll versions of old blues numbers and playing, you know, Mustang Sally, all this kind of stuff. And, you know, the next band does the same thing. Well, you know, I got sick of sitting around watching it, so I go out and go across the street and get a beer. Come back, and I hear Blind Lemon Jefferson record. I'm thinking, oh, well, this is like during the break of the bands. It must be Black Snake Moan. I hear Blind Lemon Jefferson's Black Snake Moan come on. And, you know, as I'm sitting there listening to it, I'm thinking, well, man, this sounds like, you know, this is like a really good recording, you know, because the original's got crackles and stuff in it, you know. I don't care how many times they remastered it or if they even attempted to. Probably haven't. I think they did that with Robert Johnson and quit there. But stuck my head in the door, and there was a guy, I think he was from like Japan or something. He didn't speak English, couldn't speak a lick of English, but was up there singing and sounding just like, and singing in English. He could sing the songs in English, these blues songs, but he did not. When you know, I asked around that later about him, people told me, said he cannot speak a lick of English, and so it was amazing. I mean, he could play like Blind Lemon. It sounded just like the damn record. He even went after that. He played "Take Me Back," an old traditional song. You probably heard Mance Lipscomb do it. You might have heard Lightning Hopkins do it. He went out there and played it and tap danced to it. Well, both he and I lost to the big cartoon blues band. And, you know, it showed me that blues societies, that's when I really kind of, it just made me feel like all this is too political, it's too fixed to some degree, and it's not about what I was about at that time, which was real blues, and still am to this day. And it was about something else. It wasn't about blues to me, and it just kind of left me disillusioned with, you know, blues societies and all that kind of stuff. I was like, why do I need that to go out and play my music, or you know, to play this music? It wasn't my music at that time. I say my music because I'm so used to playing my music now. I don't play blues anymore, cover songs really. Let's play my own originals. But back then, you know, I thought to myself, why do I need this to go play what I want to go play and be heard? I really don't. So I had heard about Bob Margolin and knew that he played with Muddy Waters for 7 years from my friend Max Drake had told me all about Bob. And, you know, he had known him from back in the day, from the R. Hooley days and whatnot. So it just so happens that across the street from the place where I was playing was this place called the Black Diamond. It's no longer there. It was on Bill Street. And it was a happening club, man. That's where the real blues acts went. You know, Sean Costello, I think he played there a lot. God rest his soul. I saw him once and he was dynamite. Absolutely amazing musician. But anyway, I was just walking around kind of disillusioned, and I see on this door Bob Margolin. It's a poster here, and I'm thinking, oh shit, you know, so I probably missed it, you know. And then as soon as I say that, I hear the band start up and look in there, and it's Bob Margolin and his band. Well, I went in there and really started getting a lesson, you know, in getting to see the kind of blues that I love played by someone firsthand. Up to that point, I'd never seen somebody play, you know, real Chicago blues in a room, in person, you know what I mean? So I was in hog heaven. I stayed there all night, watched the whole set, came back the next night. Found out they were playing 2 nights in rows. Tad Walters, and I don't know who the drummer was. I think maybe Wes Johnson at the time, because it wasn't Chuck Cotton. It was a friend of mine who played with Bob for, good Lord, 20-some years probably. But anyway, it wasn't him. I don't know who it was. But I know that Tad Walters, my good friend now, who I met not long after this, was there playing harmonica and guitar and bass with Bob. When I went back the next night, it was a jam situation where you could come up and play, but I just wasn't there. I just wanted to watch and absorb it, because like I said, I had never seen someone play this music live and play it play it right and play it with authority, you know what I mean? So the whole time I was in Wichita, the more I stayed there, the more I got kind of disillusioned with it too, because I became homesick. Wichita was a bland place for me because there were no mountains, there were no ocean, and it just wasn't North Carolina where I grew up and spent, you know, all my life up until then. So I was really deep down kicking and screaming to get out, even though I was doing really, 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 really well there. I had a great band. It was called Matt Walsh and the Mad Dogs. That's what my band was called the whole time there. And Jesse Major was a constant in it. He was my bass player. We had a couple drummers, Tommy Crabb, who played with Cliff Major, you know, for pretty much a long, long time. They grew up together playing. And a guy named Kyle Couch also played. Those were the 2 big drummers that played predominantly in that band. Around, I don't know, it was probably 2005, I would say, maybe 2004. There was a church up in Salina, Kansas called the Blue Heaven Studios. And once a year they would have a big blues concert, you know, with all these names and stuff, you know, and they tended to be more traditional blues artists. Well, it just so happened that one winter they decided to do another show that was called, I think it was like Bob Margolin and Friends. And it turned out that in this little Kansas town, it was Bob, Pinetop Perkins, Carey Bell, Mookie Brill, and Willie Big Eyes Smith. And I thought, man, I'm going to that damn concert. If I have to ride a tricycle there, I'm getting there. And that's where I met Bob for the first time. After the show, I sat there and watched. I was spellbound. You know, I'll never forget the highlight of the whole show, I think, was Carey Bell, and I think he was tanked. He'd been drinking quite a bit by the time he came out. But he came out, and man, I have never been hit by such authentic blues music as I was by him. And that moment, Carey Bell became a favorite of mine. And when I think about blues to this day, I mean, you want to talk about the real shit, that's it. The way that guy sang it, played it, felt it, it was amazing. And that night he was on fire, man, and the audience knew it, everybody knew it. So afterwards, you could go down and meet the band and stuff, and nobody was around, I think, but Bob and Carey. And I went up to Bob. I remember the first thing I can remember hearing Carey was saying something to Bob about being hungry, and Bob said something, well, I got some Mexican takeout at the hotel or something I'll let you have, or something, give you some of mine or whatever when we get back or whatever. And I just went up at that point and introduced myself. And I told Bob who I was and what I was into, that I was into old ship school blues, you know, especially stuff like, you know, Muddy and Howlin' Wolf, Robert Nighthawk, you know, Big Walter, Little Walter, all that stuff. And that was, you know, what I was eating and drinking all day long. And I told him about opening up for Buddy Guy. And I'll never forget, he said to me, he said, wow, he said, I bet we'll be playing on a bandstand together someday soon. And so after that, I just, you know, I would keep in touch with him. I remember, you know, I just started an email rapport with him. And he taught me a lot through those emails about things like delay time, tremolo. I would just ask him stuff, you know. Like, for example, when you play Chicago blues, should you play it like the record, or should you, or is it okay to not play it like the, you know, questions that a young 20-year-old man who's trying to really do this seriously would want to know. Well, around, I guess it was 2005 or so, I would keep making these trips back to North Carolina where I would go on these little tourlets as time went on throughout Kansas. And I'd take my son with me at the time. He was very young, Levi. And I would drop him off, and it allowed him to spend time with his grandparents and see them and his great-grandparents, all my family. And in the meantime, I would, you know, visit and then go on the road. I'd play in Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, you know, and then I'd go back to Kansas and go on tour there and play in St. Louis, Oklahoma, Kansas City, Missouri, all around, you know, Colorado. So that's what I was doing for a while. And during these trips back and forth, it was actually Bob who hooked me up with Bobby Kelly and Kelly Pace as a backup band. I said, look, I need some good musicians to play behind me. I'm coming through, so I know some guys. He even gave me Mookie Brill's number. But I ended up playing with them, ended up meeting Mookie much later and becoming, who is a dear friend of mine. But, you know, I ended up going back and forth, and I met through Bobby Kelly, introduced me to a place where I could go record a real album, you know, and that was kind of getting to be my goal, was, you know, to release my first album. I mean, I had recorded things, you know, before then that I made little CDs and sold and whatnot, but it wasn't a commercial release. And so it just fate had it that I ended up going to this studio and I started recording. And around that time, I also went and sat in with Bob when I would come back to North Carolina. A couple of the trips I sat in and played. Finally, we got to play together and whatnot. And so when it came time to record this CD, I was recording it in Kernersville, North Carolina. I knew Bob lived in High Point, and I said, hey, is there any chance that you would appear on this album? And he said, sure. So he came and played on 2 tracks. And, you know, through these trips, I also ended up meeting Chuck Cotton, and he started playing with me when I would come through. And, you know, it just got to be a thing that around 2006, I decided that I had to get back to North Carolina, even if that meant leaving everything I was doing in Kansas. I felt like that my opportunities only went so far in Kansas, because it seemed like everything just kind of went everywhere else in parts of the country, but it just kind of skipped that part of it. And, you know, it got to be where all my musical contacts, from traveling, from being on the road, you know, it just started feeling like it was probably a smarter move, that I would make more money and do a lot better for myself and get my name out there if I would move back to my hometown. And I mean, to North Carolina, and let's face it, I had grown a lot in those 6 years I lived in Wichita, Kansas. I had built myself and refined myself into a professional musician. So I came back, moved to Statesville, and released my first album called Hard Luck in 2007. And it blew up. It ended up being a pick-to-click on XM Satellite Radio, which I got to go to XM. I was invited there to record some live stuff, which they still play, I think, from time to time. But anyway, it just, from there on, I had a commercial release. It was played on, I think, 200 radio stations here, blues radio stations here. And then it was also played abroad, I think, on like 300 different stations in other countries. So it made a name for myself. I ended up getting in blues magazines, blues publications, whatnot. And around that time, Bob said, hey, listen, he said, you know, since this album is doing so well, I think I can help you. I think that, you know, if you would go on the road and do some gigs with me, that not only could it help, you know, help me obviously learn some things, but also and get to play with some, and we'll get to that probably next episode, get to play with some of my blues heroes. But also it was a way that he was very gracious in helping me get my name out there. By going and playing with him, he said, hey, if you'll play guitar or bass behind me for the set, I'll let you have, you know, a couple songs each set where you can feature your own stuff and sing and play guitar. You can even sell your CDs from the bandstand. Fine with me. And the best part is, this will be your foot in the door to these clubs that you might not otherwise be able to get into without a booking agent, or, you know, them not knowing who you are. And once, that's what I did. I would end up going and playing, and then going back, the folks would say, hey, if you want to come back and play, we'll have you back. hope that you'll come back for part 3 of this story, because it gets really, really interesting. Folks, if you have not subscribed, don't forget to do that. And while you're at it, hit that notification bell. Got other shows. If you like this one, if you're into vintage instruments, you got to check out Out of Control Vintage. If you're into fun variety shows with good original North Carolina musicians, you got to check out the Friday Night Gamble. Get hip to the tip, honey. All right. One more from me. I'm out. Bye.